Jon Jones versus Anthony Smith, early analysis. That's what we've done. And I would do that. Mark just asked a question today and said, well, why don't you start with that? And I'm like, fuck, let's just say it. So we're starting with, will Jon Jones underestimate Anthony Smith? Now, if you know me, if you don't, hi, Robin, talk about fighting, analyze martial arts. If you do know me, you know that I'm not just going to try to answer that, because there are three answers that are typical. Yes, Jon Jones will underestimate Anthony Smith. No, Jon Jones will not underestimate Anthony Smith, or other. That's it. I'm not interested in any of those answers. Also, I don't have any of those answers, and nobody has any of those answers. The main person that we might think would have that answer is Jon Jones himself. John, are you going to underestimate Anthony Smith? No fucking way, bro. That's what he would tell you, you know? And listen, if I in any way make any type of joke about Jon Jones or act a certain way or say a tone, don't fucking get anything messed up. I admire brilliant martial artists. That's why I do this. And Jon Jones is a fucking brilliant martial artist. He's a brilliant individual. He is a unique human being. So when I say, no way, bro, I'm not making fun of Jon Jones. I'm just playing. It's just fun. But he would tell you, no, there's no chance I'll underestimate Anthony Smith. But here's the for me, here are the fascinating ideas. Here are the fascinating theories. Here are the fascinating things to dig through. One of them is he can't possibly know that. He can't possibly know that. And because what is it to underestimate someone? Well, first of all, you'll only know the truth later. So whatever you think he is, either he's more than that, and then you have underestimated him, right? If you think, well, man, this guy, I'm not underestimating him, bro. So where are you estimating him then? And the reason I bring this up is a lot of I don't make up anything. I theorize things. I explore things. I've thought experiments. When they fail or are incorrect, I go, shit, that was wrong. And then we go down a different route. But a lot of the information that I get, the largest percentage of it comes from somewhere. It comes from a coach, a teacher, a fighter, someone I look up to, a mentor. You know, that's books, science, research. This is, I mean, bro, Jon Jones is the best, man. He's never underestimated anyone. That's not information. I'm trying to get real information. So what I'm saying about this is Anthony Smith, and where Jon Jones estimates him, only we will know if he underestimated him after, because there is the reality of what he is, and there is what you think he is. Why does any of this matter at all? Like, and I could feel completely logical eye rolling that anyone can have. What? I mean, who cares? The reason this matters, and the reason I said this information comes from places, is because George St. Pierre told me this matters. Firas Zahabi, his coach, told me this matters with specific examples. George and Firas believe that their level of performance, which by their own admission was underperforming, against Dan Hardy, brilliant martial artist, brilliant guy, wonderful human being, incredibly talented martial artist, and really smart, analytical guy, great television dude, great analyst. Fuck. Dan wouldn't take this as any type of insult, and George certainly doesn't mean it as any type of insult, but George overestimated Dan Hardy. Now, why would you overestimate someone? Because this is Dan Hardy. This is the fear of underestimating Dan Hardy. And then you begin to expect something. And you actually, in your mind, and this maybe deserves to seem and be read as a compliment for Dan. In your mind, Dan is bigger, stronger, faster, more talented even than he is. And you might think that's a good place to be. You might think, well, that's better than underestimating him, because if he's faster than you think he is, fucking hits you and stuff. It is also bad. Overestimating your opponent is very, very, very dangerous. Now, in this case, George was able to defeat Dan, and I don't think he had any injuries, I don't believe, and I think he won all the rounds, which he was doing at that time. He was defeating everybody by winning most of the rounds, but he didn't like his performance. His coaches didn't like his performance, and of course, credit for that goes to Dan Hardy. Excuse me. I make my throat dry from just fucking going on and on and on. That's what I do. Of course, Dan deserves, and Dan's team, coaching, preparation, talent, knowledge, everything deserves credit for that, of course, and they would give credit to that. But if you believe someone is more dangerous than he is, it can make you hesitate. If you overestimate somebody, you can underperform. You know, and a big one, the way they looked at that one is they put because Dan is such a crisp and clean and talented striker who at the time, it was much more segmented back then than it is today. The way that we still do this, but it's not true anymore. We'll be like, well, this guy's striking is here, but his wrestling is here. And I know I say this a lot, but it's because it's important. That is not how it is now. None of that is true. That's just TV shit. It's left, and TV shit is usually left over from people developing systems and formulas that get followed even when they're no longer relevant. And a lot of the world is like that. As you see, you know, I'm sorry to tangent for a moment, but as you see certain companies failing in the world, it's because they're still following formulas that are no longer logical or no longer make sense in the reality of the world around them. And so they falter, and then people end up going somewhere else. So that's why I say, you know, you can't segment it into these things anymore. I know that's an easier way to do it, but it isn't the truth. But back then it was a little more true. So they looked at Dan, and Jake Shields was a part of, I'll talk about Jake Shields in just a moment. George did this on a few occasions. He overestimated his opponents. So Dan at the time, they tried to get an estimate of how he was on the ground on his back. And they were like, we can beat this man here. He's a great martial artist, but I believe we can win here. Then they looked at the wrestling. Back then, again, you could segment it that way then. That's not so now, which is why, you know, a fight between Max Holloway and T-City is not, well, if he gets, you know, it's not just grappling and wrestling or whatever. It's control of how engagements take place. But it was like, well, if we get a hold of him, we can take him down. And then they estimated, they're like, but we cannot strike with this man. That made them underperform, because that shouldn't be a truth. But if you put somebody on a pedestal, and you overestimate them, that is just as bad as underestimating. Now, in this case, not as bad as a consequence or an outcome, because George won those fights. Jake Shields was something similar, kind of in reverse. We're only going to do this because we don't want to do this. Again, he won those fights. It is not anything incorrect, especially of the time. But now you cannot go, man, I can't go to the ground with Damian Maia no matter what. Actually, sorry, that was a potential way to look at it. Conor McGregor. So busy with the ground on Khabib. So busy after sort of where he puts him at the ground on Khabib. That's why Khabib was able to hit him. Was he fast? Was that a nice right hand? Did he throw it in an interesting way? Is Khabib way slicker and more talented, deceptive than people think? Of course. Does he deserve the credit for knocking down Conor McGregor? Of course. But if you overestimate this, or even correctly estimate that aspect of it, it distracts you from the other. So overestimating is just as bad of a situation. So that's one. Again, we're back to, will Jon Jones underestimate Anthony Smith? I'm sorry, I don't have the answer to that. And again, Jon doesn't either. Nobody does. But the reason these questions are so good, and the reason I appreciated Mark proposing it this way, was because it allows us to explore, what do these things mean? In truth, what do they mean? Jon Jones is a genius. He's a physical genius. He's far, far, far more of a mental genius in performance and martial artistry than people understand. I think a lot of people do, Mark, probably, right? A lot of people get that this guy's brilliant. He's not just strong and long and athletic.
Especially on fight night. That's when it shines the most.
Big time.
Everything else, they underestimate it because of everything else. But then when fight night comes around, they're like, oh shit, he's the real deal.
Fuck. On the night, man. And this is a slight curveball here, but Jon Jones can never just assume that'll be so. That isn't inherent. And that's a result of preparation.
The funny thing is he'll only know that night when it doesn't go on, when he's like, wait, what the fuck?
Yep. So let's look then at sort of how you position your opponent and how you assess him. That's the beginning of this conversation. The next part of this conversation is the realities of what's happening, right? So the best of the best, when you look at Jones and Gustafsson or Jones and Cormier, especially the second times where he already had the information now, that's fucked. That's fucked. That's another thing Jon Jones, people aren't giving him the credit for. The ability to learn. He learns on the fight night. He learns in the moments. But then it was like that familiarity. It's like, oh, yes, right. I kinesthetically understand where you are and what's going on and how you move and the relationship between us. It's in many ways the best guys. And Max Holloway I'll put here too. And Jones and who else is that sort of in the way that they move? Just Stephen Thompson in some ways. Who?
Stylebender.
Yes, yeah. Izzy, that's a really good one too. Actually, let's put Izzy in a separate category for just a second. Although it's a great example. Because that leads me to where we're going next. What's happening on some level is it isn't, so think of their bodies, and if you're listening on podcasts, I'm just holding up my hands in kind of random ways as if these are bodies. It isn't, if the bodies are solid and everything else is clear between us, it isn't the bodies and what they're doing, it's the space between the bodies that is the mastery. Okay? Now, Mark, maybe you can plop in right here, and maybe he can't. If I'm asking him, and if it pops up, well, it pops up. But that picture of two faces that are kind of kissing, and in between them is like a bottle or something. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know?
I'll put that graphic up.
Yeah. Okay. So right now, if you're looking on YouTube, I'm not just pointing my fingers at the camera here. You're seeing a picture of two faces that kiss, and between them is another shape. That shape is where the mastery is. It isn't in the faces as you continue to look at it. The faces are there. You see them. They are not what you're controlling on some level. Jon Jones is controlling the space between those faces. Okay? And we could do this with almost anything. Can you hand me one of my things? And I'll keep talking. And in the bookcase behind you, there's a marker. So you'll see Mark pop in here. Say hello to him. We could do this with anything, right? We could go in and if we draw anything, just bear with me. I've got a marker thing in my mouth. And if you're on podcast, well, maybe pop in on YouTube. But I think I can describe what's happening. As I color in these shapes, you see these shapes are Jon Jones and Gustafsson. You see the shapes. I'll take the marker out of my mouth. That's Jon Jones, his body, it's moving. And this is the other guy's body. But fuck the shapes. Look at the space in between it. The space between it. This is the space between your shoulder and head. And this is the space between where your feet are and where John's hand has to go. It's all one. I'm sorry, maybe I'm not showing it up. It's all one thing, but it is how you manipulate the space. So if and I know this sounds crazy to some people, and I understand it, but this is, you can think of things in many different ways. If we expand this is an arm moving somewhere, or this is something popping up. Yes, we moved the black. We moved the color. But what changed was the space. And on a high level, I know this sounds super nebulous, but on a high level, that's the difference between what Jon Jones does and what Matt Hughes did. Matt Hughes was a fucking genius of his era. But it wasn't because wrestling is the strongest base for mixed martial arts. That's what we knew then. But what we know now is Matt moved his body through space in search Matt is one of these blobs. He's in search of the chin of the other blob. What Jon Jones does is fuck with the space between the chin and the hand, or fuck with the space between the elbow and the knee, right? So one guy moved himself through space and the other guy, and you see them all doing this. Once upon a time, the attacker pushed and the other guy moved back or moved in, then wrestling took place. Now it is a moving, it's a floating, it's a distribution, and it isn't where I am or what I'm doing. It's what we're doing. It's how the relationship between our weapons and targets and each other and our feet are. And I know that sounds fucking all real nebulous and fucking coffee shop shit, but that's what's happening. Jones understands that. Jones and Holly Holm and Wonder Boy and Conor McGregor, that's what they're doing.
I think it would even be safe to say that with that space, he manipulates the opponent to underestimate that space, because you see with Glover, even recently with Gustafsson, he does that shoulder crank.
Yeah.
So now with you throwing that punch with that injured arm, that space is not real anymore. It's all distorted.
All of it happens, right? What you're trying, so let's just say my goal is to touch you, and this is the weapon I'm going to use. I can move it up, I can move it down, or I can make you move, but it's by manipulating the space between us. And that comes from sensitivity, that comes from feel, that comes from exploring the essence of the truth of the fight. And somebody who dances, someone who paints, a high-level jazz saxophonist, this makes sense to all of those people. To a lot of you, you're like, well, Robin's really fucking gone off the deep end this time. Again, this is where I explore these things. This is not the perfect way to describe it yet. But if I do this 2 or 3 or 4 times, I'll get it down into a 1-minute chunk, and then I'll be able to explain it in such a way that it will make sense, and I can influence the influencers, and it will become a normal part of conversation. That's my job, and that's what this is. So that's how different Jon Jones is. And he was on the front end of it again. Some of the other people I mentioned are a part of it. Holly, very early in women's fighting, understood this on a much higher level than other people. Conor McGregor, that's what he's been doing from day one. The Wonder Boys of the world, all these people, that's what they're doing. Then everybody kind of started to learn it. 4 years back, look at the way people moved, or 5, and then look at them now. Just retreating alone barely existed when Matt Hughes was dominant. And that's not a knock against Matt Hughes or George or fucking Dan Hardy or any of these guys who fought in those eras. They were channeling the knowledge and the feel of martial arts as it was available to them. And then people innovate and push and pull, and these ideas become, some of them just feel them. I got to train with Chad Laprise, who's a very, very brilliant mover. And he couldn't, if I had a chat with him about this, some of him would be like, well, fuck, Robin's probably smoking that weed, which I'm not, by the way. And Chad is, a very religious man who doesn't do any of those things. So he wouldn't understand what that necessarily means anyways. But some people might just think you're crazy. But if you sit with them long enough and you talk to Anderson Silva about this, he understands it, right? So now, the next wave of guys, as they were developing, they had learned punches and kicks and footwork and wrestling, the double leg, the defending of the double leg, guillotines and triangles and all the building blocks. And then they had to shift gears into, wait a second, there's a lot more art and a lot less science happening in how people are winning now. So they had to shift gears in that. And that's what Anthony Smith would have had to do, just like Jones did, or Jones was on a front end of this even before he understood that he was, because he's just so talented as well as smart. And he was put on earth to do this. So he's on the front end of it. Anthony Smith would have developed this. What's he got, 30 fights, 35 fights?
Yeah, roughly.
Maybe more. I mean, I don't know. I got my shit here somewhere. Mark will look it up. He's got a shockingly large amount of fights. That feel and sensitivity comes together. And that feel and sensitivity is something that's very hard to decipher when you look at an Anthony Smith fight. Now, the last Anthony Smith fight also, overcoming.
Yeah, he's got about 44 fights.
44 fights.
Strikeforce veteran.
He started learning early. So he learned the way Matt Hughes learned. or the way that the champions of that era learned. And then he had to feel his way through it. And now, at 44 fights, and it's something we'll talk about in one of the other segments when we talk a bit about Aaron Pico later. If you're listening to the podcast, you'll hear it. And if you're watching this as a segment, just go find that. We'll have that on the YouTube page. Is Anthony Smith starts experience gives you feel. So you go watch you ever watch jazz musicians? Yeah,
Yeah,
you know,
I observed.
you see that 55-year-old guy walk up to the sax. That guy's not fucking, he's improvising, but it's fitting in perfectly. And a kid in high school can't necessarily do that. Although, this is my point, they learn it a lot fucking faster now. They learn it a lot faster. What's my point? That's a good question. But what's my point is Anthony Smith's, that feel is the thing we don't talk about. That feel is the thing that's hard to estimate. That feel is the thing that we haven't yet, it's part of why I'm here, learned how to do that on ESPN or Fox or TSN where I work or any of these places, because we got to dig in and over time find ways to make sense of this in a way that a regular person can see.
And I think another thing that's telling when you talk about the feel, I think how it's acquired, if you look at his record,
Yep.
early on, 4-fight losing streak,
Yep.
goes on a winning streak, then 3-fight losing streak. I think it's within those
and that's
streaks.
learning in that's learning in the reality.
Right.
You know what
And those aren't even a high level, like the very first losing streak, regional scene. So it's the ideal learning.
Exactly. And you know what? We were going to talk about Jose Aldo next, but we'll move from this into Aaron Pico because it's a natural progression. Listen, it's like I would never. I'm an Anthony Smith fan, by the way. I got something about him. He's got something way more than we're seeing, and it's not that X factor of how to sell a fight. Not that X factor. This living, breathing connection to the fight. That's fucking real. Now, this is what, as much as I am an Anthony Smith fan and a Jon Jones fan, so when I say that, wouldn't you be excited for a guy like Anthony Smith to be the guy? I don't mean that in any way to undermine the fucking genius of Jon Jones. I admire the man. I enjoy watching him fight. I don't cheer for winners to lose. I don't want either guy to lose, but one of them has to. Well, actually, they don't. It can be a draw. It can be a fucking DQ. It can be all kinds of shit. But I wouldn't. So what I was going to say is I would never ever advise somebody to become great, and he is great, the way Anthony Smith became great, and that is learning in the fire, because it's too fucking hard. And did he get here where he now can handle it? That last fight, he fucking overcame some setback and pain and a few lost positions. You need that. But at 40 fights, some of us could have fucking had knee surgeries and it's over. They could have had shoulder destruction and it's over. They could have nagging headaches. They could be in a situation where they can't take a punch anymore.
They could just give up financially.
They could give up.
This is it. I'm done. I tried.
Yeah, financially or even just, psychologically.
Yeah.
At fight number 26 and, hey, man, I'm making $9,000 a fight, but, hey, I just got on with the fire department. They're paying $65 in a city where a house is only $90,000. Fuck, and I'm spitballing that. I don't know. He does have a real job from what I recall. He had a real job for a long time.
Then you start having more fun teaching.
Yeah.
You
open a school, of course.
That's usually how it happens.
Of course. It's another reason why a guy like this is not to be underestimated. And two things on the thought where I was heading. One is because they fucking lived their whole life for this moment. The other problem with that is you lived your whole life for this moment. You can fucking people crumble under the weight, and I ain't shitting on Gustafsson. And shit, when you get hit by Anthony Johnson, you get hit by Anthony Johnson. But Gustafsson in a stadium in Sweden, and please don't, this is not judgment. These are human beings doing the best they can. Nobody has the expectation that anybody should be able to have their best moment when their whole life is led to a moment. But ultimately, that's what we're asking of you. That's the greatness and the beauty of this. It is that moment you have it. And you hate on Conor McGregor all you want. But in almost every situation, that motherfucker comes through.
I know.
And that in and of itself, holy fuck, to come through like that with Alvarez and Aldo. You judge him however you want. You fucking make fun of him or hate him, but that's forever. And, you know, that's forever. And that's why it's so hard.
Yeah, because there's other guys that have fought that will look back at their fight and think,
if
Jesus
only.
Christ, what, like, not to call anyone out, obviously, but, you know, the one name that always pops up in MMA discussions, Todd Duffy. Yeah. If Todd Duffy looks back at his earlier fights from his Calm and Collected versus his fight versus Frank Mir,
yeah, or even
he would not be
Alistair.
happy. Alistair,
Yeah, for sure. But shit, you do not judge these people. They're the 1% of the 1% of the 1% of the 1% of the 1% that gets there. They've accomplished everything. And then they get there with everything, all the skills and experience to do it. And that's still that fucking hard. It's been your whole life. And you know who else? I just said Conor McGregor. Fucking Jon Jones.
Yep.
Every time. Every time, every fucking time.
Jones is the ultimate game day fighter.
Fuck yeah. Every time. When it comes down to it, and, you know, and even George St. Pierre, we just talked about it. He won those fights, but he didn't perform perfectly on those nights. Now, he was so good that he was able to draw from those experiences, and it made him even better. Jones been tested. He's been pushed, and that's good. But that fucking guy just, on the night,
it's like he enters the cage and let's see how far we can push this.
Yeah. I heard from a lot of the old school guys early on, before they thought of anything, as they were contextualizing the fight. I find this kind of shit fascinating. The old school guys who didn't know everything. They didn't know what you knew. Everybody didn't understand every move and everything. And it was just so much unknown. They would look at it and they would look at you. So one of them is fighting me. They would look at me and be like, fuck wrestling or kicking or punching or any of these things. If you lock me and that man, this is, you know, one of these old school, real proven guys. You lock them and that man in a room, they'll tear them apart. They go in with the knowledge that life or death, me or him, it's me. And these guys believe it. And they're right.
Mm-hmm. Well, it boils down to, you know, the fighter versus the athlete.
Yeah. And there was an interesting series of conversations I was having on Twitter with people who were asking what martial art is better, and would a guy with 6 months of boxing beat a guy with 6 months of jiu-jitsu? And, you know, how long has this UFC thing been going? 25 years? What year are we talking about?
Yeah, I think we're in 25 now.
I forget. 25, right?
Now we're in
26. Yeah. The shirts say 25, you know. That's what this whole fucking 25 years has been about, trying to answer that. So we can still argue it if you want, but people like guy with 6 months of boxing versus 6 months of jiu-jitsu. I think, and somebody would say, I think the jiu-jitsu guy wins more than 50% of the time. And my answer was, the guy who's mentally tougher and more committed wins 75% of the time, regardless of what he trained for 6 months.
It's like that from that movie, Al Pacino, Any Given Sunday.
Any Given Sunday.
He has that line that's the guy who's willing to die is going to win that inch.
That motherfucker is Jon Jones every time. Now, that's not necessarily Conor McGregor. He's just going to be, he has some ability to perform under the highest levels of stress. And in fact, there's no way to gauge this. We don't know exactly where it happens in the brain. You don't have some type of thing to read the nervous system and see where it lives. But for whatever reason, he has found the ability to use stress to amplify his performance. And that's the rarity of him. Jones, on the other hand, is that guy who will fucking die in there, put the two of you or him and two other guys in a room somewhere, and teeth, claws, whatever, he will tear them to pieces. Yeah. And he starts with that. Then he adds genius. And then he adds his awareness and his feel and his ability to make it up as he goes along, and talent and skill. And there's a whole lot of greatness there.
And then you mix in the big brother attitude that he always carries in the cage, you know?
Yeah.
Like
that's part of it, though.
Where he sons people.
Yeah, that sort of like, listen, son vibe that he gives, that's part of that. I'm better than you.
Break it around, pushing off people like that. Yeah. Like, he has that big brother attitude that
it's got a lot of shit.
People, I'm telling
He's got a lot of that's a lot of reasons. Now, so can Anthony Smith beat him? Yeah, right? And this will be my answer. That's not an Anthony Smith. I'm a big fan of Anthony Smith, and when we talk about underestimate, not that this matters, but I think most people underestimate him. You know why that doesn't matter? Because it doesn't matter what fucking any of us think. It's irrelevant, which is why sometimes our arguing about it seems so strange. Has no bearing on the reality of what we're seeing. However, having said that, This is not an accrediting Anthony Smith thing, although I think he is special. This is a insert any top 40 205-pound fighter in the world in this sentence. Can they beat Jon Jones on Saturday night? Yes, they can, because he's human, and humans can be beaten. Humans can be beaten. And, you know, again, there's many things we lie about, sometimes purposely, sometimes because we don't understand it, but things like chin, that's not a thing, and it doesn't just go. Like, it's not a score that fucking, there are points of the body where one is struck, you know, where one is struck in such a way that they can be KO'd, you know? There are points, the chin score doesn't carry up to the point. The coup contra coup injury is when the brain bumps in the fluid to both sides of the skull. That thing happens to people with, regardless of their 100 million score in Dungeons and Dragons on chin, right? So you can't say, well, no, he can't hurt him. Of course he can hurt him, you know? So he can hurt him, he can get him. And the best, the Jon Jones level of the best, they know this is true. And that, to circle all the way back, that's one of the things that allows them to rarely underestimate these people. Because, yes, OSP could beat Jon Jones. Did he? No. Would he very often? No. Could he? Yes. Of course he could. Of course he could. Some jackass came up to me at this thing I was at, and he's like, Robin, I love your work. Hey, bro, though, really, did you really think Conor McGregor actually could beat Floyd Mayweather? Yes. He could. He could. Did he? No. Was it likely? No. But could he? Yes, he could. Can Anthony Smith defeat Jon Jones? Yes, he can. Could fucking Henry beat TJ Dillashaw? Yes. I don't have to get into fucking early stoppages and shit about that either. Because also, that's part of it. Could Anthony Smith defeat Jon Jones? Yes. But it was an early stoppage, bro. Still a win. Right? Like, the question isn't, do it in such a way that there's no debate either. It's like, could you defeat, can OSP defeat Jon Jones? Yes, he could. And then people's response to that is like, no, I saw the fight. He couldn't. On a different night, in a different setting, with different series of variables, yes, he can. Because of that, Jon Jones will be prepared. And a prepared Jon Jones is really fucking hard to defeat. Yeah, so hard that it's never happened ever. And there's a real chance, I was saying this on Periscope, when I say everyone loses, we all know that's not totally true. You let me off the hook. Nobody's going to be mad. Like Mark say everyone loses.
Everyone loses.
Right? I'm not mad at Mark. Because it's so fucking close to true that I just give him a pass, right? Like, it's not like he's full of shit. It's just so almost true that it's basically true. But it ain't true. Not everybody loses. Khabib's never lost. If he retired tomorrow, Khabib never lost, and Mark's full of shit when he says everybody loses. Fucking Floyd Mayweather, I don't think he's going to lose now. He's not going to take a fight he could lose in any way. Why would he, right? And Jon Jones may be one of those. But he's got to do that on the night against a guy who has developed that feel in reality. And I think that's the biggest, if we take a last thought on Anthony Smith, that's the biggest difference between him and any of these guys, is he learned it by trial and error, by success and failure. Cormier never fucking lost. There was no success and failure. Holy shit, that's completely wrong. How do I retool? What do I have to learn? What do I have to change about my relationship with fighting to make this work? Cormier never had that. Gustafsson barely had that. AJ beat him, and there was Jones beat him.
He had it early in his career when he fought Phil Davis. Then
true, and it did change him.
Became better.
It did change him. He became better. Yeah, he became better. He did. So there's a great example. But it wasn't enough.
But see, I was just about to say that's he was a young lion at that time. Then when he the second fight for Jones, married, kind of settled in. You don't want to leave your country, So I doubt. Yeah. I'm not 100% sure, but I doubt he spent that much time training out of lines for that title fight.
No. But it's, this is all
I
these
get
things
there's
matter.
quality training partners there and all that, but history proves itself that, if you had tremendous results going to this one place, why wouldn't you want to go back there?
Why wouldn't you? And for many people, it's because of other things, and they may choose very logical things. My family or my kids or my whatever is here, so therefore I can't this. it's your life. By all means, if you want to spend more time with this, and this isn't the case here, but
course, yeah.
in a case where you'd say, I can't go to Albuquerque or California or whatever because of my family, that's your life. You only got one. Do what's right for you. You're not put on earth to make me, or fucking just bleed 420 on Twitter or whoever, do it for us. And legacy isn't necessarily more important than any other aspect of your life. So you do what matters to you. But another, I know I said last thing a few times, but keep getting thoughts that I think are interesting and maybe provoke conversation, although nothing provokes conversation like picking a side and arguing it to the death. I just think we're all a little tired of that. I think we're going to get away from that. And we see it. We see it. Joe's 3-hour podcasts and Dr. Peterson and fucking that British guy who was in Forgetting Sarah Marshall.
Russell Brand.
Russell Brand. These people do 3 and 4 hours of pontificating. Why? Because fucking we can think now. We don't have to choose a side and fight to the death anymore.
That is until Dan announces Khabib versus Conor too.
Yeah, once he announces Khabib versus Conor too, we just pick a side and fight to the death.
Back
again.
to World War again.
That's what we'll do. Yeah, it's an interesting one. I'm really, we could have a lot of these same conversations about Usman and Woodley. And one of the things I said I would circle back to about Stylebender, about Izzy, is the very difference. I hope this is a simple concept. If in my left hand is Matt Hughes and in my right hand is Jon Jones, the way that they are different, one day in my left hand will be Jon Jones and in my right hand will be a new one. Yeah. And Izzy is one of these new ones. And when is he fighting Anderson? It's next weekend already. So we might get to it Tuesday when we get together. Anderson versus Izzy can be that. It can be that. Anderson fucking, this whole two faces looking at each other with the graphic up and the space between them is what they're manipulating. That was Anderson Silva earlier. Well, maybe there's a third dimension. Maybe it's made out of clay now. Maybe you spin it. Maybe you see it from a different perspective. But it all goes deeper because that's how our brains evolve. So whatever that next step, that could be Izzy. Could be Izzy Adesanya. Anderson Silva can feel it, and I'm not saying he is, but he can, and plus he's slowed down potentially. Either him or Jon Jones or whoever can one day feel as dated in the way that they fight to the way that we now see early Vitor Belfort versus Vanderlei Silva. Yeah. Awesome fight. Don't get me wrong. Just a different era. Leather helmet football, those old black and white things, they're carrying the thing with their leather helmet to now. As different as that is, if football continues, and I don't think it will, too much brain trauma and attendance is down and the NFL's old and they don't let people share their footage and there's a lot of reasons to think football may actually get in trouble in the next 5 years.
Stuff, yeah.
Yeah, but if it did, today's football would look like leather helmet era to 10 years from now football. And that goes on forever. And just because Jon Jones is a genius today, in 10 or 15 or 20 years, depending on how fucking ahead some of these guys are, somebody else makes them look old. Izzy is one of these guys who has the potential to make these guys look old. Will he? Hey, man, I don't know. I can't see the future.